shown over the past 18 years. And I do hope that today's conviction goes some way in enabling them to move on with their lives. PC Sharon Beshenivsky lost her life in the most horrific of circumstances in the line of duty. She will always be remembered.
Sharon Beshenivsky had just 2 hours left of her shift on that fateful day, her daughter's 4th birthday. Now, after almost 2 decades, her family have seen the man who planned the attack in which she was murdered finally brought to justice. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Leeds.
President Biden has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu tonight and called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, saying Israel needs to take concrete steps to address the civilian harm and the safety of humanitarian workers. Here in the UK, the pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister to suspend arms sales to Israel. 600 people, including former Supreme Court judges, signed a letter warning that the UK could breach international law. And now officials in the Department for Business and Trade say they want to stop work over the arms sales. But Rishi Sunak is also under pressure from those who argue that Britain should support Israel and its right to defend itself. Sky's political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
Killed as they tried to help. The deaths of 7 aid workers after an Israeli airstrike this week has sharpened the focus on the legality of the conflict in Gaza and the UK's role in exporting weapons. Now, in a 17-page letter to the Prime Minister, more than 600 legal experts, including 3 former Supreme Court justices, have called for the UK to change course. They write serious action is needed to avoid UK complicity in grave breaches of international law, including potential violations of the Genocide Convention. The sale of weapons and weapons systems to Israel falls significantly short of your government's obligations under international law.
The point about having an obligation to prevent genocide is that you have to take steps to ensure that it doesn't happen or doesn't continue. It seems to me perfectly clear, therefore, that to supply arms to Israel is not consistent with our obligations.
The lack of clarity has led to civil servants working on export licences to threaten to down tools over concerns they could be held criminally liable. Senior officials said that was unlikely, as they were satisfied international law was being followed. But the UK has acted on export licences to Israel before, in 2002 and 1982, and it could happen again if the government decides humanitarian law is being broken.
If that is the view come to by the government, then it's not a political choice by the government. It has to be, it's a legal one, and the law has to be obeyed. The bar for evidence is high, but it's not unreasonably high. However, the difficulty is finding out exactly what has happened.
And that's why the politics matters too. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron was in Brussels today with NATO counterparts. While UK arms exports to Israel are relatively small, suspending them would still be a big and potentially divisive geopolitical move.
The Foreign Office says it keeps its legal advice under review, but maintains that it's confidential. For the government, the diplomatic consequences of suspending arms exports likely outweigh the domestic. But still, there are splits within the Conservative Party on the issue, ones that largely mirror divisions across the country and across the globe.
And Rishi Sunak can ill afford to anger more of his colleagues. This former cabinet minister, one of several MPs, urging the Prime Minister to hold steady.
The question is the state in question doing all it can do to minimise those innocent civilian casualties? And I believe that Israel is doing that, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think arms sales should be discontinued.
The government's tone on Israel's war in Gaza has hardened in recent months, but now many want action to match the words. Devastation in the Middle East echoing through politics here and around the world. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Let's go to our US correspondent now, Mark Stone. Mark, we're talking about the British tone in that package by Rob Powell. What of the American tone now? We know that President Biden has had a telephone conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening. What was said?
Yeah, another conversation. They call each other relatively regularly, although as the war has dragged on and their relationship has got more difficult, those calls have been less often and they have become more prickly. And I think the latest phone call has certainly reflected the most difficult of relationships now. But I don't think we should read into the readout, as it's known, of that phone call any suggestion of an immediate or a material shift in American policy. Don't assume that America is about to pull military support for Israel. It is not. What perhaps will happen is a shift of some sort in the American policy on what they believe should be happening in Gaza, but that does not mean that the Americans would shift and pull support for Israel militarily more broadly, because they know, as we have discussed before, that that would present an existential threat for Israel because of other challenges it's got, not least with Iran and its proxies across the region. But looking at the readout of the phone call, it is clear that President Biden is very unhappy with the way Israel is prosecuting the war in Gaza. And the inflection point, as one US official put it today, has come because of the deaths of foreigners, frankly. I mean, it's worth pointing out that more than 200 Gazan Palestinian aid workers have died since the October the 7th attacks last year. But it is the deaths of foreigners which has really jolted this place, the White House, and has moved them to harden their language. I should tell you one other thing as well. We were expecting a news conference in Tel Aviv tonight, which would, we think, have given details of the investigation that the Israelis say they have carried out now of the deaths of the 7 foreign aid workers. That news conference has been postponed, but we do know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been briefed on the detail of that investigation. So stay tuned over the course of the next 12 hours or so. I imagine we will get more detail on that investigation, and that will have a ripple effect in places like here in Washington.
OK, Mark, thank you. Nearly 33,000 people have died in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. But now that Gaza's healthcare system has collapsed, leaving the authorities unable to accurately measure the number of people killed, they're supplementing their figures with data where the origin is unclear. Sky News' data and forensics team have been looking at how the health ministry is increasingly relying on news reports to count the number of people killed. A warning that this report by Tom Cheshire contains images of dead bodies.
How the dead are counted counts. It is difficult and it is politically contentious. Figures are put out by the health ministry in Gaza, ultimately run by Hamas. Gaza's established method for recording deaths relied on a computerized system that connected 8 major hospital morgues across the territory. Here you see them in green. Now, they're about to turn red. We'll talk about why. But the UN and the WHO told Sky News they consider this hospital data to be trustworthy. But that changes from the 10th of November. Hospitals in the north start going offline, only able to provide emergency care. On the 10th of November itself, Israel raided Al-Shifa Hospital, and officials in Gaza say they seized 2 data servers. 2 other hospitals also stopped reporting. Look what happens after then. Since then, 5 of Gaza's 8 major hospitals have stopped reporting data through the system, including all hospitals in the northern half of the Strip. Instead, they're increasingly relying on incomplete data, gathered manually by hospitals, by first responders, and by local journalists. And they're coming out with this, unidentified bodies. They account for 81% of additions to the official death toll in March, up from 69% in January. The analysis by Sky News data and forensics team shows the increase in the official death toll since the 11th of December is in line with what's being recorded in the hospital systems for the 3 southern hospitals that are still working, still providing data. Taken together, these 3 hospitals saw a 98% increase in deaths over the same period, so that does seem to tally. Now, the collapse of the central monitoring system has also made it less clear how many women and how many children are among the dead. On the 10th of November, the day that the communications with northern hospitals broke down, the ministry reported that nearly 3/4 of fatalities were women, children and the elderly. Now, the Ministry of Health estimate since then has maintained that sort of proportion without explaining their methodology, and actually the proportion rises a bit. But the available hospital data, now this doesn't include the elderly, but it does show that the proportion of women and children being killed in this war has been coming down as the war has progressed. That is a different trend from what's been reported. These figures don't distinguish between civilian or Hamas militant. Is there anything we can say about that?
Let's just say half of the people in this young adult and older children male demographic are fighters, then you can get an estimate of civilians being upwards of 90% of the people killed during the first few weeks of the war.
Doctors at Al-Shifa Hospital had reactivated the data monitoring system last month and had hoped to continue its work. But the latest attack on the hub means that plan has collapsed. And of course, only those who have been found can be counted, by whatever method. Many still lie beneath the rubble. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Detectives say they won't ever be able to identify human ashes found at a funeral parlour in Hull. 35 bodies were recovered at Legacy Independent Funeral Directors, now the centre of a police investigation. Our North of England correspondent, Charlotte Leeming, has been speaking to one man who used the funeral home to arrange his wife's cremation in November.
They rang me up and said, can we come to see you, because one of them coffins has got Jean's name on it. And I thought, oh my God, what's happening here? And I said, is Jean in it? And they said, we don't know.
Mike Collinson was with his wife Jean for 50 years. When she died late last year, he arranged a cremation through Legacy Funeral Directors, the firm at the centre of a police investigation.
I was devastated, do you know what I mean? I thought, oh, what's happening here? She's already been through the process, so why is that coffin there with Jean's name on? And they said, I can't tell you that. And I think that's what's devastating them, that they can't tell people, yes, it is, no, it's not.
It's a month since the inquiry was launched and 35 bodies, along with human ashes, were recovered from premises. In recent days, hundreds of families have been contacted by police to tell them they may never know if ashes they have are their loved ones.
Unfortunately, given the high temperature required to carry out a cremation, the DNA will have been broken down and degraded to such a level that we would not be able to recover a meaningful DNA profile. This means that we are unable to attribute any of the human ashes or identify them. This will, of course, be devastating news for families and loved ones, and you have my heartfelt condolences at this really difficult time.
A man and woman have been released on bail, and the impact of this investigation is being felt widely across Hull, with other families telling Sky News how the uncertainty over their loved ones' whereabouts is causing them anguish and pain. Tonight, families attended a special vigil to remember their loved ones.
Well, not only is my family and me affected, but there's a lot of other people affected by different stories by this, and the main idea is to show that you're not alone. We're here for each other and we're to support each other through this, because this is not going to be a short-term thing.
This candle-lit vigil has provided the community with a focal point, somewhere they could all gather together and support one another in such uncertain times.
The emotional impact of this investigation is being felt across this city, with some families now facing the possibility of saying goodbye to their loved ones for a second time. Charlotte Leeming, Sky News, Hull.
Senior Conservative MP William Wragg has admitted giving the personal phone numbers of fellow MPs to someone he met on a dating app, according to a report in The Times. Police in Leicestershire said tonight they are investigating reports of malicious communications. Let's cross to our political correspondent now, Matthew Thompson, who's in Westminster for us tonight. Matthew, what more do we know about this story?
Well, look, this scandal has rocked Westminster for the last several days. It's been all anyone's been talking about. Essentially, it emerged from a report in the Politico news website that a number of MPs, their staff, and at least one political journalist had been the targets of a malicious phishing attack in which they'd had messages sent to them from suspicious phone numbers that they didn't recognise, that those messages had started off being flirty. They had then got quite explicitly sexual and involved, in some cases, sending of explicit photographs. The targets were all men. Some of them were gay, some of them were not. The people pretended either to be a man or to be a woman, and it's understood that at least 2 MPs replied in kind with explicit messages of their own. It's thought that the attacks were probably malicious in nature in terms of trying to get compromising material. But today, the Times newspaper has reported that senior Conservative backbencher William Wragg may be one of the originators of this controversy, in the sense that it may have been him that gave out the personal contact details of some of these MPs and staff in the first place to a man that he met on Grindr. William Wragg is an openly gay MP, and he has confessed to the Times that he did indeed give out personal information. He says in the interview with the newspaper that this person that he'd met on the gay website Grindr had compromising things on me. They wouldn't leave me alone. They would ask for people. I gave them some numbers, not all of them. I told him to stop. He's manipulated me, and now I've hurt other people. I got chatting to a guy on an app. We were meant to meet up for drinks, then we didn't. I've hurt for people by being weak. I was scared. I'm mortified. I'm so sorry that my weakness has caused other people hurt. Now, there's been much speculation about who's behind these targeted attacks. Some politicians have suggested it might even be state actors. There have been reports recently about Chinese cyber attacks. Other experts are less sure. They think it may just be malicious attempts at blackmail.
Matthew, thank you. 10 people have died and 700 people are cut off in Taiwan after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. People's homes collapsed and landslides covered roads in debris, while rescue workers are still trying to free 11 people stuck beneath the rubble. The 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck yesterday, just before 8 a.m. local time. The effects could be felt as far as Shanghai in China, with tsunami warnings issued for southern Japan. Multiple aftershocks rocked Taiwan's capital, Taipei, but the worst hit was the eastern city of Hualien, the epicenter of the quake. In Taroko National Park, where at least 4 people have been killed and dozens remain missing, efforts are underway to rescue hundreds of people who were trapped, most at a youth centre and a tourist hotel. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports.
It is a surreal sight. Stranded holidaymakers and hotel staff trapped in the aftermath of an earthquake, waving down help, caught in what is known as the Tunnel of 9 Turns. It was a twist of fortune that they could eventually make it out, rescued through winding roads and rubble. The worst damage was in Hualien, a mountainous region famed for its spectacular views, but it can be treacherous. Some roads simply fell away.
In the area of Silk's Place Taroko Hotel, there are about 600 people trapped, including tourists and hotel staff. The next step is to wait until the road is open.
This was an earthquake that caught many off guard. Some immediately moved to protect others, though. Here, nurses grabbing onto babies in hospital as the room shook. Here you can see the full force of the landslides. Cars struck by falling boulders. Rescue operations focused on 100 people trapped in mining areas in a national park. Dozens were caught under the rubble of their homes.
I was going inside to buy breakfast when the earthquake started. I didn't know what caused the earthquake. Suddenly, it got much stronger, and I heard the rumbling sound of the ground. My whole body was just thrown out, but the owner of the shop pulled me back in.
And there have been more than 200 aftershocks. Taiwan is a fault-ridden place with a long history of earthquakes and a response system many see as a model. It is thanks to lessons learned and robust building that so many survived it. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News.
380 inmates are currently on death row at San Quentin in California. 13 men have been executed at the prison since 1978. The last execution was in 2006. 5 prisoners on death row have been found innocent and released from San Quentin. The last one was 6 years ago. And now plans are being put in place to transfer the condemned prisoners and transform the jail into a Scandinavian-style prison with a focus on rehabilitation, education and job training. Our US correspondent James Matthews was granted access behind bars.
I'm in here for killing another gang member. I shot him in the back of the head.
In my case, I killed another inmate, and it was either me or him.
For a kidnap for ransom, I killed my cellie.
California's most dangerous criminals are sent to death row San Quentin.
Escort coming out!
Sky News has been given rare access to its condemned wing.
What are you guys doing?
James Matthews, Sky News. Death row prisoners here are among society's most segregated.
I don't think lions and tigers should be locked up like this.
Here, everyone has a story.
Is this to like the newspaper or something?
A dark one.
Coming out!
Robert Galvin, serving life for kidnap, killed his cellmate, or cellie, so he could be sent to death row and find a lawyer.
I killed my cellie. That's the only way I was going to be able to get back into court, to do something like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Stop them.
Yeah.
And
now I got a good lawyer. Now I got an appeal. We're
going to move along.
The death row prisoner is allowed out only in handcuffs and watched by armed patrol.
Death row, it's a lot of cell time. Dark, kind of parasitic, the environment.
We have to strip down naked, show ourselves, and then get handcuffed to go anywhere.
After a moratorium on the death penalty in California, condemned inmates are being sent from here to other institutions and rehabilitation. Prisoners moved on from here will still have a death sentence, although in reality they'll be serving life without parole. That will only change if there's a reversal in policy.
I don't want nobody to look at me like I'm some kind of a monster or anything like that. I want to be treated equally like everyone else. I think a lot of laws is being changed. It might give me another chance at life.
This move doesn't chime with victims groups who object to condemned inmates avoiding execution. But it will happen by the end of summer. Death row dying a death itself. James Matthews, Sky News, on death row in San Quentin.
The number of people with suspected autism who were referred for diagnosis by the NHS has increased 5 times since 2019 and is higher than ever before. Some people are also having to wait up to 3 years for an assessment. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
As Kevin's finding out, it's not easy these days to get a diagnosis of ADHD on the NHS.
It's important to mention that a reassessment may result in a diagnosis of ADHD not being made.
Frustrated by delays, he went private to see a world-renowned psychiatrist for a rigorous 20-hour assessment. But now he's been told to get NHS treatment to keep him calm and focused. He still needs to join a 12-month waiting list to confirm what he already knows.
When I've spoken to the managers of the ADH clinic in Staffordshire, they said that it's not our fault, it's the commissioners, it's national policy, it's Whitehall who are responsible for this, and we have to follow this process. That's not good for a person who has got the condition and wants to get on with life and, you know, have medication.
Rising awareness of neurodiversity is driving up demand for a diagnosis. Latest figures show more than 170,000 people in England were on the waiting list for an autism assessment in December, the highest ever reported. Official guidance says people should be assessed within 3 months, but 79% of people had been waiting longer. ADHD waiting lists are also thought to have grown. A survey by a parliamentary committee last year found 24% waited between 1 and 2 years for an appointment and 10% between 2 and 3 years. It matters, particularly to children with their whole lives ahead of them.
For a child, having the diagnosis may mean that the school understand that you can't cope as well with a very noisy classroom, that you're going to learn in a particular way, that you need time out, that you need support in the way in which you are going to interact with your peers. and therefore they can wrap that support around you and give you the experience so you can thrive.
Kevin's life is in limbo while he waits for treatment. An NHS spokesperson said a task force had been launched with the government to provide a joined-up approach to care. But for Kevin, it's all far too slow. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by journalist and author Ian Dunt and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this in the Eye, its headline, Sunak urged to publish legal advice on arms sales to Israel. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. A man has been found guilty of the murder of PC Sharon Beshenivsky in Bradford more than 20 years ago. Senior Conservative MP William Wragg has admitted giving the personal phone numbers of fellow MPs to someone he met on a dating app, according to a report in The Times. UK civil servants overseeing arms exports to Israel have asked to stop work immediately, while President Biden has told Benjamin Netanyahu the situation in Gaza is unacceptable. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Ian Dunt and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let us see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Guardian leads with President Biden calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, telling Benjamin Netanyahu future US support for Israel will depend on it taking concrete action to protect civilians and aid workers. The Eye says Rishi Sunak is preparing to suspend arms sales to Israel if new legal advice suggests the state has broken international law, as pressure grows to publish the updated guidance. The Mail reports a senior Tory MP has admitted providing the personal numbers of influential Westminster figures caught in a cyber honeytrap scandal. The Times says the MP, William Ragg, chairman of a Commons Select Committee, told the paper he handed over the personal phone numbers of colleagues to a man he met on Grindr, a gay dating app. The Metro has coverage of the inquest into the death of soldier Charlie Sawol. 2 Chinese state-owned banks hold a crucial role in the future of Thames Water, reports the Financial Times. The Express claims preparations for the first deportations of migrants are being speeded up after Rishi Sunak said he was ready to pull out of the European Court of Human Rights to get planes off the ground. And King Charles has told aides to ramp up plans for his 2-week state visit to Australia after a positive start to his cancer treatment, according to The Sun. And The Star asks, what time is it on the moon? Interesting. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Ian Dunt and Salma Shah. Welcome again to both of you. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian and following on from this phone call between Biden and Netanyahu. President Biden is demanding a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yes, so he's calling for an immediate ceasefire, and this comes very swiftly off the back of aid workers being killed in an Israeli strike. The tone here is really interesting because it's changed significantly from where we started, where Biden was talking about being standing shoulder to shoulder. So this is a significant shift. There have been reports in the US press where actually White House officials have been allowed to brief anonymously frustrations with Israel in the lead up to this phone call. So I think now that the US has spoken, things are going to get a little bit trickier for Netanyahu in Israel, who is also facing calls for an early election from his coalition partners and opposition leader Benny Gantz. So it's certainly creating a lot of pressure and tension at the top of Israeli politics.
Ian, do you think that this is a turning point? I mean, we've kind of said this many times before, but do you think that this really is now, with Biden's tone completely changing?
The tone is extraordinary. I mean, it's incredibly harsh. And we felt it over the last few months, really, just Biden becoming more and more public and vocal and explicit and clear about his irritation with Netanyahu. Then you suddenly wake up and you read this kind of thing, and you're just like, well, this is quite extraordinarily aggressive and to the point, and not really bothering with any of the usual political euphemisms that you might couch this kind of commentary in. Biden has played a pretty cautious game over the course of this. You know, he really went out of his way to stand next to him at the very beginning of this thing and to try to earn himself the right to be heard with the administration, but also with the Israeli people themselves over the course of it. And this feels like increasingly there's this sensation in the White House of just like, well, it hasn't really worked. We haven't actually managed to really moderate, you know, Israel's behaviour in the Gaza Strip in any meaningful way. The one really successful, you know, initiative that America had was really just sending out the boats in the very early days and being, we are going to contain this situation and it is not going to spread. But outside of that, you feel that hugging him close didn't work. So now we're seeing the alternative approach, which is to be much, much more aggressive indeed.
I think it's really interesting, though, because the one thing that we all have to realise here and read this through is that we are looking at lots of election years for a lot of administrations. So, you know, not least ours, when we don't know when that is going to be, but, you know, at some point in the next 12 months, we know that the US is having elections. And so a lot of this is motivated, I think, on the Israeli side as well, thinking, well, you know, how long is Biden going to be there? We don't know. And for Biden himself to think about how this is going to play out on the electoral campaign as well. So there is that dimension that I think we have to consider when looking at these stories.
As you were saying, Ian, in no uncertain terms, the US have made it clear their direction of travel. A quote here that the President made it clear that the US policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps, and that is, you know, the protection of humanitarian aid workers and of civilians. So it really is a turning point in that. If there isn't a change in policy, a visible change, America will change towards Israel.
Also, I think, like, internally in Israel, there's another line that actually The Guardian hasn't highlighted on the front page. It's the point that Biden sort of says, what are you doing about the hostages? Like, why are we not seeing more of a focus on getting the hostages back? We're expecting to see a completely different approach towards the issue of the hostages. Now, that, in domestic terms in Israel, is the really powerful sort of emotive force in this. So in that context, you think, wow, I mean, that is quite a thing to be saying to Netanyahu at this particular moment.
Well, domestically, that's what his own people have been saying, that he's not focusing on the hostages, but intent on prosecuting the war.
That's where the protests are, as well.
Yes.
I mean, you know, in terms of what are the acute pressures that he faces at home, it's on that issue.
Let's move to the eye, Salma, and Rishi Sunak's handling of this latest incident with the three British humanitarian aid workers being killed in Gaza, and the publishing of this legal advice.
Yes, so this is about whether we continue arms sales to Israel. There has been lots of discussion about sort of our level and contribution to Israeli arms, and some people are saying it's around 1%. So we should continue supplying arms because they are an ally in the Middle East. But what is coming back is legal advice that the Israeli state has broken international law, and therefore we can no longer support Israel with arms as a consequence of that. And ministers seem to be waiting for this advice to be able to make that decision. In fact, Ian and I was discussing this earlier. There is precedence for the UK to suspend arms to Israel in 2009 because certain naval military equipment was used in the Gaza Strip. And previously, actually going back to 1982, I can't remember if there was a sanction, but certainly Mrs. Thatcher, who was Prime Minister at the time, rebuked Israel. And she was a great ally of Israel's, but rebuked them over their...
Yeah, I think it was 2002 and 1982 with the...
With excursions, I thought it was 2009. I might be incorrect on that. But yeah.
We'll fact-check that.
We'll be all Googling once we're off, this is something that we have done before. You look at the legal case that's being sort of presented to the government in sort of increasingly kind of also quite aggressive, you know, communications being sent in by lawyers. And they're alluding to two things. I mean, the first one is the arguments on genocide, but the second one is actually a much more moderate argument and a much harder argument to counter, which is on Clause 7 of the UN Arms Trade Treaty. Now, that is about, are you going to have a risk assessment for any arms that could be going off, that could be breaking international humanitarian law? Now, on that basis, you look at the kind of images of what we've seen over the last few months, and regardless of whether people are sort of friends of Israel, whether they're more critical, regardless of their position on that, you basically see, well, hang on, what do we have? Like, we have, you know, hospitals that have been reduced to rubble. We have, you know, the latest attack on humanitarian workers wasn't an isolated incident. We've seen incidents like this, you know, throughout the conflict. And, of course, we see what looks like, you know, a famine. It's quite hard to be able to assess the extent of that famine because most of the journalists have been removed from the Gaza Strip because there aren't, you know, there's not a lot of people on the ground to report what's going on. Now, in that context, that more moderate argument seems like quite a tight one. And when you see the nervousness of someone like David Cameron talking about this, there's a point David Cameron when he was talking today, where he just went, look, I don't want to answer any questions on Israel. An extraordinary thing for a foreign secretary to be saying. You get the impression, this could be wrong, but you get the impression of that looks like you're being given internal legal advice that would suggest something that isn't politically convenient to you at the moment. And it feels like that's where the tension in the British government is right now.
And until we know what that is, it's all sort of speculation.
Just
to say we did a quick fact check, and I was right, 2002, 1982.
You didn't even have to check your phone.
Yeah. Genius.
Let's have a look at the Metro. Same story, in that talking about the pressure that's growing on the government to end arms sale to Israel, however minuscule those might be. But Rishi Sunak facing pressure on both sides, because there are those that saying, well, we need to support Israel, as we always have done, and others saying that we need to stop selling them arms.
Yes, and this is interesting because this is not just about the legal context. This is actually about his own MPs and backbenchers calling for this. So you've got Paul Bristow and Flick Drummond, who have expressly called for an end of arms sales. So this is not really about the sort of ethical or legal considerations. This is about the politics of this as well. And I reference back what I said about this being an election year. Lots of MPs with lots of constituents who are very concerned about this, who will be lobbying their MPs on this issue as well. So we'll see a lot more of that. On the other hand, you also have the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who is apparently in Israel at the moment and insisting that there was no breach of humanitarian law. But I can't see that she's basing that on anything other than her own eyewitness testimony. But yes, there is again this sort of split for the Prime Minister to consider politically, as you say, from those people who are saying we absolutely must support Israel no matter what, and those people who are saying this actually needs to be considered in the round much more holistically.
There's a link here, isn't there, really, when you look at some of the sort of Republican attacks on Biden around his commentary today, and you look at what Braverman is doing when she's there. I mean, there's a certain extent that in countries like the UK and the US, and arguably around the world, when people talk about Israel, they're not really talking about Israel. They're basically talking about their domestic political calculations. Israel serves as a kind of totem, typically on the right, of showing, like, well, no, I stand by Israel no matter what. That's really what Suella Braverman is there doing. I mean, when Suella Braverman says, I've seen the delivery trucks, I've seen this, it's absurd to say that Israel... You think, this is not an objective, informed appraisal that you're offering us. All this tells us is where you want to position yourself for the coming Conservative battle, rather than anything about...
Can I just say...
Just very quickly.
That might be sort of... We can't speak to what Suella's intentions are, but I think there is a very convincing argument on the right that does talk about our support for Israel in the Middle East and the wider context of what we're sort of doing there in terms of the British interest. So I don't want to sort of completely, denounce what the Conservative right thinks about this. I think it's an important part of the debate. I just think that we have to look at it in a much more rounded, holistic way.
Yeah, I'm going to stop it there. Just to get one more story in, and this story's on the front of the Mail. It's also in the Times, and the Mail headline: I gave MPs numbers to sex, I can't even say it, sex sting plotter. And this is what's been described as a honey trap cyber scandal. What more do we know?
Well, this is actually quite a shocking story, because we have William Ragg, who is actually, by all accounts, quite a respected MP in Westminster circles, who's admitted and come forward and said that he met somebody on Grindr who I think had... essentially, I don't want to use the word blackmailed him, but had compromising material on William, and then forced him to give up these numbers that then led to spear phishing, so targeted potential cyber attacks of colleagues. I think this is shocking for a couple of reasons. One, you would expect a different kind of judgment from a senior MP like William Ragg. I mean, I accept that people make mistakes, and he's come forward and confessed this. But also just how vulnerable our public officials still are to this kind of attack, and how easy it seemingly seems to be able to access that.
We must go to a break now, but I just want to bring in what William Ragg has said himself. And he said they had compromising things on me. They wouldn't leave me alone. They would ask for people. I gave them some numbers, not all of them. I told him to stop. He's manipulated me, and now I've hurt other people. I got chatting to a guy on an app, and we exchanged pictures. etc. And it goes into further detail, finally saying, I'm sorry that my weakness has caused other people hurt. So just to get his words out there in the public domain as well. Salma and Ian, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break. Coming up, more from the newspapers, including this in The Guardian. Its headline, Tories planned for app to make party millions. Stay with us to find out more about that.
Well, basically, it's in two parts. Part one is 1999. I wanted to take my detective, Louise Mangan, back to her early days in the Met. 99 was very interesting. That's when the Macpherson report came out. You know, the Met were accused of being institutionally racist. And there was the terrible murder of Jill Dando, which is still unsolved. So that's fictionalised as a kind of peripheral issue. But what happens back then in 1999, then in the second part in 2019, those strands come together. I'm delighted that you enjoyed it.
I loved it.
And I'm delighted you read the previous two, because many people know I wrote memoirs, but they're still catching up with the fact that I'm now onto...
So what, you were former Home Secretary, so you get facts and stretch them into fiction? How do you work?
No, I don't. I think I could have written these books if I hadn't been Home Secretary, but what it did do was give you a better focus on how the police work with the security service, for instance, both of them involved in this book, and how the kind of rankings work. You know, you don't become an expert overnight when you become Home Secretary on these things, but you do understand elements of it, and some of the characteristics have found their way into the book. Listen, as Home Secretary, as all previous Home Secretaries will tell you, you know things that you can never talk about, things that the security service do and the police to keep us safe.
Turn grey?
That's one of the things that made my hair turn grey. Being interviewed by people like UK was the other thing that made my hair go grey.
I was always a pussycat with you.
Yeah. So when you know these things, you can't... I mean, they're state secrets. You can never tell anyone, no matter how close they are to you. So none of that's gone into the book. I reassure anyone listening from the Cabinet Office. But the characters that you meet and, you know, you understand...
I did feel like I was there. I did feel like
Did you?
Yeah.
Did you? Well, it's set, of course, on an island in the Thames called Tags Island that exists. So I'm a great believer that, and you've written a few yourself, that if you're going to write a novel, there has to be an element. Place is very important. And if the place is somewhere real, and you're describing real streets and real roads and, you know, real architecture, it kind of helps the fiction to be more realistic for the reader.
Welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. Still with me, journalist and author Ian Dunt and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Let's have a look at this story in The Guardian about the Conservatives planning to put out an app which should make the party millions of pounds. Salma.
Well, this is interesting because I think this is something that is done quite regularly with commercial sort of entities. It is that they are going to use the data from their party membership and hand it over to allow big brands to advertise to party supporters. So it's a very classic sort of data story. And so the use of that kind of first-party data is going to be used in advertising. It's something that's been done before, but it would be interesting to see how they would inform party members.
Yeah, I was going to say, can they just hand their data over like that?
No, I think it's got to obviously through GDPR compliance or whatever GDPR is going to be now that we're not under European regulations. But it would be interesting to see how they sort of justify that to party members and how many people actually sort of unsubscribe from using any of those methods in the little tabs that you get as the options.
It would certainly be lucrative, wouldn't it, Ian?
It would be. I mean, this is the primary way that a lot of people make money now, which is really not so much providing the service, but providing your customers in terms of their data. It's a bit weird, though, for a political party to be doing it. You know, when you go to party conferences, right, it's half myth, but there's still this thing of like, well, we're in a joint effort here. You know, this is part of a political mission. Well, we're just one big family. And, of course, none of this is really true. They're not really one big family, and it's usually quite fractious. But to then start saying, well, actually...
That sounds like quite one big family. It's quite fractious.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Yeah. But then, you know, when you're seeing this, when you're seeing leaked documents, you know, this stuff is being done for obviously really quite pronounced financial reasons. Money is not actually that easy to come by for the Conservatives at the moment, which is part of the reason they got themselves into such a mess over the Hester issue. So suddenly you find, well, actually, that's probably a really different view of how many party members would expect their party to be talking about them, their worth to the party and their personal details. So, yeah, you'd need to check it again. But I think that there's a subtle wrinkle between what you might expect from a political party and what you would expect from a corporation or an app that you've signed up to in the private sector.
Do you think they're going to have an issue with trying to enforce this?
They might do, but I think, actually, it's so par for the course now for lots of people to use data in this way. I wonder if there is going to be the same kind of, like, backlash or retaliation against that kind of data being used, as long as they get that permission. I totally get what you say, you know, the idea that you're supposed to be part of this one big family, but for years, you know, party conferences and things like that have been commercialised. So it will be interesting to see, you know, what is the retaliation against something like this.
All right, Salma and Ian, thank you very much. We are going to see you in the 11 o'clock hour. In the meantime, let's take a look at the weather for you. Well, the unsettled weather will continue with Storm Kathleen bringing strong winds on Saturday, but it will turn warmer. Friday will start wet for many, with snow on the Scottish hills, but parts of the west will be dry. It'll be very mild in the south, chilly in the north, but rather windy for all. Northern, central and eastern Britain will see early rain and hill snow clearing during the morning. Coming up next on Sky News at 11. Justice 20 years on for PC Sharon Beshenivsky. A man extradited from Pakistan is found guilty of her murder.